This is the gospel story today. There is a manager, and he is squandering the riches that belongs to another person. And the person with the riches calls the manager and asks for an account statement. He says, "Why have you squandered what doesn't belong to you?" These last few weeks, the world has been introduced to a 16-year-old Swedish girl called Greta Thunberg. At the age of 8, Greta learned about the climate crisis and became deeply depressed, so depressed she was mute. She was so torn up inside, she was not able to go to school. What pulled her from her depression was watching the reaction of American students in February of 2018 after the shootings at the Marjorie Douglas Stoneman School in Parkland, Florida. Those students were not quiet in the face of gun violence. Those students, those children stood together and began the March for Our Lives campaign, speaking truth to power. Greta found her voice for the cause of the climate crisis. She made signs and she went to Parliament in Stockholm all by herself and sat in protest. The news media got curious in August of 2018 after experiencing heat waves and wildfires during Sweden's hottest summer in 262 years. Greta, who had just started 9th grade, refused to attend school for 3 weeks until after the Swedish general election. Her demands were that the government reduce carbon emissions in accordance with the Paris Agreement. Other students joined her, and so began the School Climate Action Movement, in which every week on Friday, students somewhere in the world strike and leave school in the name of climate action. Many adults have reprimanded Greta. They insist students belong in school. In February of this year, over 200 academics signed an open letter of support for Greta skipping school. They say they are inspired by her actions and that the striking students are teaching the world something. Also this year, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres endorsed the school strikes initiated by Thunberg. This year, Time magazine named Greta one of the 100 most influential people in 2019. She was named the 2019 most important woman in Sweden, and she has been nominated for the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize. We owe it to young people to give them hope, but I don't want you to be hopeful, she says. I want you to act. I want you to act as if our house is on fire, because it is. This is the story in today's gospel. There is a manager, and he is squandering the riches that belong to another person. And the person with the riches calls the manager and asks for an account statement. He asks, "Why have you squandered what does not belong to you?" The great contemplative scholar Beatrice Brutto teaches that the meaning of divine community, so the Trinity, is continual indwelling. So God continually indwells in the Christ and God continually dwell in the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is continually dwelling in God and the Christ. And not just once in time did that happen. God did not indwell God's self in Jesus in Bethlehem one night only, nor did Jesus only indwell in the Holy Spirit at the ascension. And God did not only indwell at creation. The indwelling of God and the Christ and the Spirit is a continual and perpetual event. It is always happening. As people of faith, we recognize and bring ourselves into that sacred event. We are also the divine community, so we are always indwelling in God. We are always being indwelled in the Christ, always being indwelled in the Holy Spirit, and always being indwelled in one another, always being indwelled in creation. It is continual and it is perpetual. Bruto says that we are always giving away our being and always receiving being. It means that each one of us is claiming the other's life is our own. And the other is always claiming our life as theirs. This is the great mystery. I am the other living in me. In the American consciousness, community is generally different than this perpetual indwelling. It is generally considered a collection of I's. My resume is sitting on the same page, same pew with your resume. We are like a three-ring binder, all together, but each with our own page. Christian community is meant to be altogether different than that. Christian community is not manyness, but wholeness. As Bruto suggests, Christian community is not a collection of I's, but a we. The gospel today continues. If you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? We cannot help but think of the climate. We cannot help but think of the earth. If we have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give us what is our own? The we-ness of the Christian experience does not decimate the individual. It is not an annihilation of us. What Bruno claims and the faith insists is that we are more truly ourselves when we are whole than in our singularity. So that's a lot to wrap our brain around. We are more truly ourselves. I am a better self. I am more myself when I am connected and whole with all of you and with this world, then I am myself by myself, alone. I find myself in you. I find myself in the world. We find ourselves in one another. We discover ourselves in the world. If there is a gift come for this crisis in our climate, if it is not too late, we might finally have ears to hear and eyes to see what the faith has been calling forth for 2,000 years. The goal is not our personal salvation. It never has been. We are only saved as much as we are saved together. And the first place we might begin to save ourselves and save one another and let the Christ save us is by saving our collective home. In a few minutes, we will commission intercessors for healing prayer, which happens every day, every Sunday following the Eucharist. Today, we're going to move that happening into the sacristy. And I invite you, whether or not you go for healing prayer, to move through the sacristy after the service to see the beautiful icon we have installed in there of the Christ. In the church, we focus on healing prayer, which is not curing prayer. though cure sometimes is part of healing. Healing is about returning again to oneself, being restored, as Martin Israel says, to the divine image. So that indwelling thing. Healing comes not necessarily because there is any change to a circumstance, but because we are able to bring the whole of our experience, our sickness, our grief, our shadows, fears, our brokenness, into the great and sacred we. Healing comes because we are no longer set apart, but we are restored. We make healing prayer part of the liturgy because we aren't restored in isolation. We don't heal on our own. We are restored by God, and nothing of God is set apart from the whole. Our healing is bound up with one another. We need each other to heal. And our planet needs us to heal. We should all be on our knees for this planet, our island home. Our own healing is surely bound up with the healing of our world. Greta Thunberg calls for the healing of the planet. She says it is up to you and me. And yes, we need a system change, she says, rather than individual change. But she says you cannot have one without the other. We are the system, and we, as we are of God, are also the healing. There's a great Russian initiation story of the Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga is an old, wild woman who lives in the forest and knows all things. It is the ultimate spiritual quest to seek wisdom from Baba Yaga. There are 3 seekers. The bravest one goes first, makes her way through the woods to the house of Baba Yaga. I am here for wisdom. And Baba Yaga calls through the door, are you here of your own devices or because someone else sent you? I came of my own devices, says the bravest one. Baba Yaga threw her into a pot and cooked her. The shrewdest one came next. Baba Yaga calls through the door. Are you here of your own devices or because someone else sent you? My father sent me, said the shrewd one. No good, says Baba Yaga, and she cooks that one too. Finally, the simple one arrives at Baba Yaga's hut. Are you here of your own devices or because someone else sent you? The simple one says, I have come for myself, and also I have come for others. And Baba Yaga says, you will do. Come inside. Come inside. We enter the spiritual realm, not just for our own hearts, and not just for the calls of the world. It is only when we see that we can be whole only with the other, when that sense of separation of myself and you and me and that warm climate out there is gone away. That is when we enter the spiritual realm. There are 2 amazing energies in this parish. I believe it is why people like it here, why they make it their spiritual home. There is a deep commitment here to the importance of the inner life. There's a sense that nurturing the life of the Spirit in you as is as important as caring for the body, as in minding our careers, that the spiritual life grounds all of life. If you feel good in this place, it is not because we have beautiful windows, though we do. It is because there are people here looking through the window of their heart, deeply navigating their lives in the name of the Christ. This is evidenced in the adult forum, in spiritual direction groups, in contemplative prayer practices, in healing prayer. There is also a long-standing and deep committed energy in this place to the world beyond these walls. The list of ministries supported by this place is just the beginning of the evidence of that. Bounty and Soul, Food Connection, Swannanoa Valley Christian Ministry Association, the Ministry of Hope, Black Mountain Counseling Center. There are others. When I was interviewing for this job, a pal asked me if I felt I was qualified, if I had everything on my resume I thought I needed for the job. I said, I have not been arrested. A lot of people in that church have been arrested for Jesus. She's one of them's behind me. This week, you will be invited to join this community in taking a deeper look at what it means to be part of the sacred we. To come inside for yourself and the world, because we are not a collection of eyes, not in this place and not out there when we get under those trees. David Lamott, some of you know, is going to lead us for 3 weeks in conversation and reflection around the subject of belonging. What does it mean to be we? Not in this American life, but out of this thing of Jesus, out of this thing of this faith. What does it mean to be we? And we will challenge ourselves to be community like we have never let ourselves be community before in this American life. We will gather first on Wednesday, October 9th, and we'll say some prayers together, and David will talk to us, and we will talk together. And then we're going to do some things, and I don't know what those things are, but we're going to do some things. And then we're going to have a bowl of soup together. And after David goes, Jeff Keith is going to join us, I think, and talk with us about how some of this played out historically in Black Mountain and how we live and move and have our being around things we aren't even conscious of. And then the Episcopal Church has put together an amazing program that we will also enter in that'll ask us to look deeply at who we are and how we make belonging in the world, how we become the we. This is the story today. There is a manager, and he is squandering the riches that belong to another person. And the person with the riches calls the manager and asks for an account statement. He says, "Why have you squandered what does not belong to you?" A little 16-year-old girl called Greta. And I want to tell you that Greta is also on the autism spectrum. Got in a no-emission boat and came across the Atlantic Ocean to speak to us about what it means to be we. The last line in her piece says, "It is time to rebel." I want to say this. We do not rebel against one another. That's not what she's calling for. We rebel into one another, into this life. And finally, and most deeply, we rebel into Christ, into what it means to be Christians. I'm thinking of her going across the ocean. She's talked about it with Noah. What's Noah's last name? On the comedian, Noah? Trevor Noah. She talked with him, and he was asking her about coming across the ocean. And I loved that interview. And she talked about the salt water and the smell of the ocean every day. And this came to me, this quote from Khalil Gibran. I'm going to end with this. May there be such oneness between us that when one weeps, the other tastes salt. Amen.